Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. I appreciate that my last Essential was also a fairly recent record, being Burial's Untrue, but throughout the course of this series and the next few installments after today, I will start talking about more 20th century classics, so I will get a bit more of a balance going on there. Today though, we're looking at a record which celebrated its 10th anniversary on the 1st of January, an album called Deathconsciousness by Have a Nice Life. Have a Nice Life are an experimental rock band from Connecticut comprised of musicians Dan Barrett and Tim McHugh. Their sound, and I'm basing this only on 2 Have a Nice Life records so far, is a mixture of post-rock, drone, ambient, industrial, and even some might say a type of shoegaze dubbed new gaze, which is not a title that I particularly like, but there we go. It's also been frequently dubbed post-industrial doom gaze, which, although might help to explain the sound of this record, is a pretty awful genre tag. I won't be using that one too regularly, I've got to say. Deathconsciousness is Dan and Tim's debut record, an 85-minute double LP of crushing darkness, yet it's a darkness that rolls in with this kind of all-encompassing wash of beauty. Despite Deathconsciousness now being held by many as a work of near genius, at time of release it was almost entirely ignored. There was basically no fanfare on release, and slowly people started to appreciate Dan and Tim's music through places like 4chan's Mew posting board. There was a real sort of obsession that built up around that sort of time for that record in particular. People were really started to become engrossed in Dan and Tim's ability to craft a record which communicates a real replete, despairing feeling, but it's also wonderfully vital. It's life-affirming. It really does communicate those 2 different feelings in such an audacious way. It's a record that never feels too long either, despite being 85 minutes in length. In fact, every single moment feels essential. I still listen to this record once a week or once every 2 weeks, and have done so ever since I first heard it back in 2008. There's just something so entirely enchanting about Dan and Tim's music making process and the final piece that they unveil on Deathconsciousness. The way that the emotions ring out so potently, it means you want to keep experiencing it over and over again. One of the most impressive things about Deathconsciousness is the economic way in which it was created. So Jonathan Tuitt, who's the guy that runs the Flenser, which is a record label that repressed Deathconsciousness back in 2014, I think, said this: "This is a record that was created with tools that are available to anyone. Pretty easily, very cheaply. A lot of the sounds are probably presets, and it didn't need a lot of tweaking. It's kind of like a record made by an everyman, even though it's a work of near genius." If you make music, this record is absolute proof that a lack of access to expensive equipment does not have to stop you from being able to make an incredible piece of music. It's all about the vision, and Dan and Tim clearly had that in spades when they approached making Deathconsciousness. Both musicians have acknowledged in interviews that many of these tracks were almost born out of a kind of necessity. They were writing these songs around the time that they were both dealing with that heavy shadow of death. With this thematic weight comes a very personal sounding record. As you listen to the plethora of wonderful tracks across both discs, the crushing pressure of death as a concept on the human psyche feels palpable. Even on the album's most beautiful track, the opener, A Quick One Before the Eternal Worm Devours Connecticut, it manages to communicate that thematic weight of death. It has this ever-present drone threatening to mollify those fragile acoustic guitar arpeggios. The band's commandment of ambient soundscapes on this track desperately makes me want them to make more ambient sounding work, because it's such a beautiful way to open a record. It doesn't really prepare you for what's going to follow, but it does certainly establish that atmosphere, that thematic weight that is ever present throughout these tracks. The concept of death and suicide permeates every track on this record, not just the musicality, but also the lyricism. Now, there is a loose concept which comes with this record, which is probably more clearly brought out if you read the 70-page hefty booklet that came with the CD pressing and the vinyl pressing, which talks about the life of Antiochus, which I think it was a 14th century figure who advocated for death and suicide, trying to convince people to kill themselves as a means of escape. Although it's an interesting concept, it's not one that I particularly connect with as I listen to this record. Yes, you could read a lot of these ideas of Antiochus into the lyricism, but I think they're also more free associative than that. And it's almost as if you want to delve into this record and discover more about Antiochus, then you can do that, and you can draw some stuff out of that. But it's not essential to unlocking the power of this record. Even in interviews, it feels as if Tim and Dan shy away a little bit from talking about this concept of Antiochus. They would rather talk about the way that the record was created and the fact that it was created at an emotionally difficult time for both of them. And I think knowing that these songs were written under the shadow of death for both of these musicians is powerful enough for me to connect with this record and make it feel personal. I mean, that's just my own approach towards the idea of the concept, but other fans of this record might feel different. So let's have a discussion about it in the comment section. The second track, Bloodhail, after that calm opener, absolutely pounds. Led by a post-punky bass riff, there's this snare which cuts alongside a reverb-heavy guitar and these washed-out vocals that sit somewhere far in the distance. Tim and Dan never let their vocals take over the tracks. The vocals are very much in equal weighting to the instrumentation, sometimes even slightly drowned out by the instrumentation, although I'm not too sure how much of that was purposeful or as a result of the problems that they went through in the production process. Not only did Dan and Tim produce this record on a measly budget of $1,000, but they also lost the master WAV files in a hard drive crash, which means that the final masters are actually 128 kilobytes per second MP3 files, really lossy files which have artifacts in them and are, far lower than the quality you would expect from a record that's being released. You can hear it on moments throughout the record. It's in the crunch of the kick drum on the track Hunter. It's the way the soundscape distorts on the track Waiting for Black Metal Records to Come in the Mail. And yet, rather than feeling like a downside, which is what you would expect 128 kilobytes per second masters files to be, the slight depreciation of sound quality, the elements of decay, in fact enhance the approach of the record. They become part of the music. It becomes another tool for Dan and Tim to communicate these themes, whether purposeful or not. And that makes the music feel very personal once again. The sheer emotive punch that I feel every time I listen to the track The Big Gloom is just crazy. You know those tracks where wherever you are, whenever you are, they have an ability to just floor you? Well, The Big Gloom is one of those tracks for me. The scuzzy guitars coupled with those fragile harmonied vocals that very gently sing, please, please, please release me. It's an extremely emotive moment in an album full of those kind of moments. Dan himself has said in the past in interviews that The Big Gloom is his favourite track of the whole record, and it was the first time during the production process that he felt as if they were really working towards something special. Holy Fucking Shit 40,000, a track which title I think references the suicide rate in the USA. It is a deceptively twee-sounding track in some ways, until halfway through, all hell breaks loose and it sounds as if these bass frequencies are just going to disintegrate the entire track. Final track, Earth Mover, is one of my favourite album closers, simply because it so wonderfully distills everything that makes the record so special. It sucks up all of those emotions and influences and then blasts them out with this overwrought and cacophonous burst of raw feeling. Tim and Dan's alluring vocal harmonies, once again drenched in reverb, define the melody of the track, the melodic quality of the track, but they're half drowned out by a booming drum kit, scuzzed out guitar sounds. The track builds to this absolute behemoth of a conclusion, the bass dropping out to this distorted drone note as apparently in the studio, Tim threw his bass guitar down and walked out because it became too much for him to be playing this song. His emotions were just welling up inside him and he just couldn't do it anymore. And that's an amazing thing to catch on this part, on this ending of a record that's so defined by emotion. You know, I've said the word emotion about 50 times in this video alone, so you know that that's what it's about. But to be able to capture that moment of personal, raw emotion at the end of a record which is defined by those kind of feelings is just so special. To have such a misanthropic sounding record with all of its existential angst very clear on the surface, to also cogently reveal this heart-wrenching, life-affirming beauty, this vitality, this need to live, is just astonishing to me. It has a fractured charm to it, one which Dan and Tim never allow to be completely buried by the raw anxiety and introspective nature of their music, these feelings about the fragility of life, the shadow of death, and finding some balance somewhere in between. That's why Deathconsciousness by Have a Nice Life is absolutely a Deep Cuts Essential. Thanks for watching another Essentials video. I'll be back with this series soon because it's quite a fun one to do. Definitely going to be talking about some more interesting records. Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts on Deathconsciousness are. I think it's a really great record. We're going to be doing a listening party for it on the Discord on Tuesday at 10 o'clock BST, so come along and listen to that with me and some others and we'll get some good conversations going. Thanks for watching. See you next week.